So the cheese soufflés are basically a very thick sauce that has folded whisked egg white into it. Now, to get things ready for it, I've put a kettle on, and that's just boiled. Just fill it with water. You don't have to have an exact amount of water. And then for my dishes, I've got little dishes which I've buttered really well. These are ramekin dishes, and I've cut out discs of baking parchment, and I'm putting a disc of parchment in the base of each dish. Don't worry if you don't have ramekins, any small dishes will do. You can even use teacups or mugs, or if you don't have small dishes, just cook it in a bigger casserole dish and just have one bigger souffle. Soufflés normally have straight sides to the dishes so that they can rise up, but it's not essential if you don't have that type of thing. And then I found a roasting tin that these 6 dishes will fit into, because what I'm going to do to cook them is cook them in a water bath. So I'm going to pour some boiling water into the tin, and that stops them overheating then. So what I need to do now is to make the sauce. So in the pan I've got 30 grams of butter, and I'm going to melt that. So once all the butter's melted, I'm going to tip into the pan 30 grams of plain flour. So I've just lifted it off the heat while I mix it all in. Right, so I'll put it back on a fairly low heat to cook it. So I'm cooking the starch grains. Then what I'm going to do is gradually add the milk, a small amount at a time, and before I add any more, let that totally thicken or come to the boil. Don't add all the milk at once or you'll get a lumpy sauce. So when that's come together into a smooth, thick sauce, I'm going to add a pinch of salt and a grinding of pepper to it. And I'm going to add a level teaspoon of dry mustard powder. I find that adding mustard brings out the flavour of the cheese. Then I'm going to turn the heat off, and I'm going to add the cheese. So the cheese should melt from the residual heat in the pan. So I'm going to take the pan off the heat now, and the cheese will have cooled the mixture down because I turned off the heat. It wasn't continuing to heat it. It's still looking just very, very slightly lumpy from the cheese that hasn't melted, but don't worry because that will all melt when it's cooking. But because the cheese has lowered the temperature of it, I can now add the egg yolks. So it's going to have 2 egg yolks, one at a time, and beat them in. So you don't want the mixture to be too hot when you do this, or what happens, it will start cooking the egg yolks and it will end up like scrambled egg. So once you've beaten one yolk in, add the second one. So that's the sauce base already. What I need to do now is to whisk the egg whites. So I've got 2 egg whites in my bowl, and I'm going to whisk these until they're stiff. So you don't want to whisk the whites too much or they become very dry, but they need to be whisked enough at their stiff peak. And what I mean by that is you can actually turn the bowl upside down and they're not going to fall out. So that's got the maximum amount of air in. Now you need to use a spoon that's got a cutting edge on it. This spoon has a nice sharp edge. Don't use anything with too rounded an edge like a wooden spoon. Either use something with a nice cutting edge like that, or use a metal spoon. So I'm going to take a spoonful of the egg white and fold it gently into the cheese mixture. So this will start to loosen the cheese mixture. So when that's well mixed in, I'm going to now transfer this mixture to the bowl of the egg whites. So I'm going to spoon it to the side of the egg whites, not bang on the top of it, or you'll knock all the air out. So take out as much of the mixture as you can. And then you need to gently fold the egg whites in. So I'm pulling the spoon through the mixture, cutting it to incorporate it. I'm making sure I take the spoon right down to the bottom of the mixture. So it's important not to be too rough at this stage, or you'll knock the air out of it. And you need the air in the mixture to be the raising agent so that the souffle will rise. So that's pretty well mixed now. So I'm going to divide the mixture between my ramekin dishes. So scraping it in on the bigger spoon and using the smaller spoon to scrape it off. So they're almost ready to go into the oven, but I'm going to pour some hot water around them. So I'll take one dish out to give me a bigger area to pour. And I'm filling it till they come about halfway up the height of the dishes. And then I can pop that other dish back in. So I've got the oven preheated. If it's a conventional top and bottom heat electric oven, you do it at 190. I'm using a fan oven, so I've got it set on 170, or that would be on gas 5. And they'll probably take about sort of 20 to 25 minutes. So I'll set the timer for 20 minutes just to have a peep at them and see how they're doing after that time. So I'm going to check on the souffles. And they have risen quite nicely. So I'm going to leave them now for a few minutes so they'll start to go cold, and they will collapse down, but when they get heated for a second time, then they do rise up again slightly. So I'm just leaving them for about 5 or 10 minutes until they're cool enough to handle. These are going to be twice-baked souffles, so I'm going to prepare another tin to put them in. With this, I'm going to take some baking parchment and just press it into the base of a shallow tin. This one's a tray baked tin that I normally use for brownies, but any sort of shallow roasting tin will be fine. So these are now cool enough to handle. So I'm going to lift them up, wipe off the bottom of the container, and use a small palette knife or rounded blade knife to go around the edge, and then hopefully they'll come out. This one I think is going to need a little bit of extra help. That one's coming now. And the bit of paper stayed in the bottom of that. You need to make sure you either remove the paper or peel it off if it comes off with it. So around the edge, and then just make sure it comes out. souffles now in the lined tin. Now they can be left at this stage, so what I'm going to do is actually cover the tin with some cling film and keep them chilled until I'm ready to cook them. You can actually make these a day in advance and then heat them the next day. So if you were doing a dinner party, they make an ideal starter because you can have most of the work done the day before. So I'll cover those and put them in the fridge. So I'm now ready to cook my souffles for the second time. I've put the oven on because it needs to be preheated. So I've got a fan oven, so I've set it at 180 degrees. If you've got an oven with just top and bottom heat, set it to 200. But most ovens, electric ovens, are fan ovens, so it should be 180, which is gas 6 that we want this on at. So got my souffles in the lined tin, and I'm going to pour over some whipping cream. Try and make sure as much of the tops are covered as possible. And then I'm going to scatter over some grated cheddar cheese, just to make sure they're extra cheesy. It's also nice to do this with Parmesan, but because I used cheddar in them, I thought it was easier just to use mature cheddar to go on the top as well. And then to give it a little colour, I'm going to sprinkle some paprika onto the tops of these. So just a little bit on the top of each. I find it's easier to put it on a spoon and then pinch it over rather than tipping a pot over the top of it. If you tip a pot over, it's very easy to get too much. So these are now ready to go back into the oven, and they'll take 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm going to put the timer on for 15 minutes. So when the timer goes, take them out of the oven to have a look at them, and they should be risen and a light golden colour. Use a wide knife or a fish slice to lift the souffles out of the tin and transfer each one to a serving plate.